The polished wood of Eleanor Vance's desk felt cold beneath her trembling fingertips, a stark contrast to the burning dread in her stomach. The telephone receiver pressed against her ear, its plastic cool and unyielding, carrying the crisp, impersonal voice of a bank representative. Sunlight, usually a welcome guest, streamed through the office window, glinting off a framed photograph of her father, a man whose proud smile now seemed a silent accusation. He had built Vance Luxury Motors from nothing, a beacon of automotive excellence, and she was watching it crumble. "Ms. Vance," the voice stated, devoid of warmth or understanding, "this is our final communication regarding the outstanding loan. The terms of your agreement are clear, and regrettably, without significant movement on the asset by month's end, we will be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings." Each word landed like a small, precise blow, chipping away at her composure. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, picturing the sprawling showroom, the gleaming chrome, the carefully curated elegance that was her family's legacy. It all hinged on one car, one incredibly expensive, stubbornly silent, million-dollar machine. A knot tightened in her chest, suffocating her. She swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. "I understand," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. She wanted to argue, to plead, to explain the unique circumstances, but the bank cared only for numbers, for deadlines, for assets. The line went dead with a soft click, leaving behind an echoing silence that amplified the frantic beating of her heart. She slowly lowered the receiver, placing it gently back into its cradle as if it were a fragile bird. The cold seeped from her fingers, up her arm, settling deep in her bones. Eleanor rose, moving to the window overlooking the city. Below, tiny cars moved in an endless stream, oblivious to the catastrophe brewing in her high-rise office. She saw the Vance Luxury Motors sign, bold and illuminated, a symbol of prestige that now felt like a cruel joke. Her reflection stared back from the glass, a woman in her early 30s with dark circles under her eyes, her usually sharp features softened by exhaustion and worry. She smoothed down her perfectly tailored blazer, a futile attempt to regain control. Every sleepless night had etched another line into her face. Every failed attempt to fix the car had chipped away at her resolve. Her father's words, spoken so many years ago, haunted her. "A Vance never gives up." But what if there was nothing left to give? The door to her office opened, and Marcus Thorne, the chief technician, strode in with his usual air of self-importance. He was impeccably dressed in a pristine technician's uniform, his slicked-back hair gleaming under the office lights. A confident, almost condescending smirk played on his lips, a look Eleanor had come to both rely on and resent. He was supposed to be her best, the one who could solve anything. But this time he had failed. "Eleanor," he boomed, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the quiet office. "Just the woman I wanted to see. Good news, or at least progress." He leaned against the doorframe, radiating an unjustified aura of competence. Eleanor turned from the window, a flicker of something she dared not call hope sparking in her weary eyes. Her throat felt dry, a desperate thirst for genuine solutions consuming her. "Progress, Marcus?" she asked, her voice still strained, betraying the raw anxiety churning beneath her composed exterior. She clutched her hands tightly behind her back, her nails digging into her palms. The scent of Marcus's expensive cologne, usually a sign of professionalism, now struck her as slightly cloying, almost false. Marcus pushed off the doorframe, walking further into the room, his stride confident. "We are narrowing down the possibilities, Eleanor. These hypercars are complex, a whole different beast from your standard sports luxury. It is not a simple matter of swapping out a part." He gestured dismissively with a hand, as if explaining basic mechanics to a child. "But my team and I are working tirelessly. We are exploring every avenue, running every diagnostic conceivable." Eleanor listened, her gaze unwavering, searching for any genuine assurance in his words, any glimmer of a concrete plan. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken truths. "So you're saying you're close to a solution?" she pressed, her voice a little stronger now, imbued with a desperate urgency. She thought of the bank's cold voice, the final warning. Time was not a luxury they possessed. Marcus paused, a fractional hesitation before his smile returned, wider and perhaps a touch too practiced. Absolutely. We've managed to rule out several key systems. It is merely a matter of time before we pinpoint the exact anomaly. He puffed out his chest slightly. Rest assured, Eleanor, that million-dollar beauty will be purring again very soon. I have complete faith in my team and our capabilities. He said million-dollar beauty with a reverence that almost made her believe him. But the hollowness in his eyes told a different story. Eleanor merely nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible movement. The fragile spark of hope died, replaced by a dull ache of resignation. She had heard this before, countless times over the past 6 weeks. Every day brought new promises, new reassurances, but the car remained stubbornly silent, a monument to their collective failure. The scent of fine leather from her office furniture, usually comforting, now seemed to mock her with its association to the luxurious cars she might soon lose. She felt the heavy weight of her father's legacy pressing down, threatening to crush her. Down in the service bay, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, Arthur Finch moved with the quiet efficiency of a shadow. His worn janitor's uniform, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old oil, seemed to blend him into the background of specialized tools and gleaming machinery. A slight limp, a constant reminder of a past he desperately tried to outrun, barely disturbed his steady gait. He pushed his cleaning cart, its wheels a soft rumble on the polished concrete, past the array of lifts and workbenches. The air here was thick with the scent of grease, solvents, and the subtle metallic tang of frustrated effort. He paused near the central focus of everyone's despair, the million-dollar car. It sat on a lift, a sleek, futuristic hypercar, its carbon fiber body a deep metallic blue that somehow absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. Its intricate engine, usually a marvel visible through a glass panel, was now obscured by disconnected hoses and diagnostic equipment. It was a masterpiece of engineering, currently reduced to an immobile, silent sculpture. Arthur's hands, though calloused and roughened by his daily tasks, possessed an underlying dexterity that spoke of a different kind of work, a precision long hidden. He ran his cloth over a nearby toolbox, his eyes quiet and observant, taking in every detail. Marcus's team of technicians buzzed around the car like agitated bees, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of confusion and growing desperation. Arthur listened to their frustrated murmurs, the clinking of wrenches, the low growl of diagnostic computers. He heard phrases like no signal from the ECU, intermittent power fluctuation, and sensor readings are all over the place. He saw them scratch their heads, consult thick manuals, and stare blankly at screens full of indecipherable data. Their hands moved clumsily, sometimes fumbling with connections, sometimes tapping components with a tentative uncertainty. He felt the vibrations of their heavy footsteps on the concrete floor, sensing their growing panic. Arthur watched as one technician, a young man named Tom, slammed a hand onto a workbench in frustration. "It makes no sense," Tom muttered, his voice tight with anger. "Every test comes back inconclusive. It's like the car is actively fighting us." Another technician, a woman named Carol, sighed, running a greasy hand through her hair. "We've checked every victoire, every sensor, swapped out the control unit twice. Nothing." Her words hung heavy in the air, tinged with a palpable sense of defeat. Arthur continued to wipe down a grease-stained table, his movements methodical and quiet. His mind, however, was a whirlwind of calculations and observations. He noted the specific sequence of diagnostic tests they were running, the points they checked, and more importantly, the critical areas they overlooked. He saw the subtle sheen of oil on a seemingly unrelated pipe, the fractional looseness in a connection they dismissed as superficial. His internal monologue, a torrent of mechanical genius, dissected their every move, identifying the flaws in their approach. They're chasing symptoms, not the root cause, he thought, his gaze lingering on a particular area of the engine that remained untouched. They don't understand the synergy, the way these systems interact on a fundamental level. A deep, almost physical ache settled in Arthur's chest. It was the familiar pain of seeing a beautiful machine misunderstood, combined with the deeper, more profound sorrow of his own past. He remembered another car, another crucial moment, another mechanical failure that had shattered his life. He pushed the memory down, burying it deep, forcing himself back to the present. He was just the janitor. He observed, he cleaned, he remained invisible. It was safer that way. The faint smell of stale coffee from a discarded mug reached him, grounding him back to his task. He pushed his cart further along, moving into the deeper shadows of the service bay. He could still hear the technicians, their voices growing more agitated. They were now arguing, bickering over trivial details, a sure sign they were lost. Marcus, he knew, would soon reappear, projecting his usual confidence. But Arthur had seen the flicker of panic in his eyes more than once. The chief technician was good at hiding his incompetence from Eleanor, but not from Arthur's keen, unblinking gaze. Eleanor, her heart heavy with despair, decided she could not simply sit in her office and wait for the inevitable. She needed to see for herself, to somehow gauge the true extent of the problem. She walked through the pristine showroom, the silence of the space amplifying the echo of her own footsteps. Each gleaming car, each testament to luxury and speed, felt like a ticking clock. The million-dollar car, though in the service bay, cast a long shadow over the entire business. She inhaled the familiar scent of new leather and high-octane fuel, a scent that was now inextricably linked with her crushing anxieties. She reached the entrance to the service bay, hesitating just outside the swinging doors. The cacophony of frustrated voices and clanging tools reached her, a stark contrast to the showroom's hushed reverence. She pushed the door open slightly, peering through the gap. Marcus was standing in front of his team, his back to her, his voice low and intense. Eleanor decided to remain unseen, hoping to catch an unguarded moment, a true assessment of their progress. She heard the scrape of Arthur's cleaning cart in the background, a steady, rhythmic sound. Marcus, unaware of Eleanor's presence, had finally dropped his facade. His shoulders were slumped, his hands ran through his perfectly coiffed hair, dislodging a few strands. He looked utterly defeated. The air around them felt cold despite the warmth of the overhead lights. "Listen up," he snapped, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage and fear. "I do not care what diagnostic you run next. I do not care what theory you have. It has been 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and we are nowhere." He paced back and forth in front of the silent hypercar, his frustration palpable. Tom, the younger technician, spoke up tentatively. "But boss, we've tried everything. We've exhausted all standard procedures, even some unconventional ones. We've been through the schematics dozens of times." Carol nodded in agreement, her face pale. Marcus stopped pacing, turning to face his team, his eyes wide and wild with a desperate helplessness Eleanor had never witnessed. His voice, usually booming with false authority, now cracked, barely a whisper. "Everything? Everything, you say?" He scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. He pressed his palms against his temples, his gaze darting around the service bay as if searching for an answer in the shadows. "The truth is, we have no idea." His words were low, filled with a raw, agonizing defeat that pierced Eleanor's very soul. "We have absolutely no idea what is wrong with this godforsaken car." Eleanor froze, the air knocked out of her lungs as if she had been physically struck. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, crushing the last vestiges of her hope. Her eyes burned, a hot, prickling sensation behind her eyelids. She felt a cold dread spread through her veins, turning her knees to jelly. The quiet rumble of Arthur's cleaning cart, moving steadily in the background, seemed to be the only sound in the world. A single hot tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. A tear for her father, for her legacy, and for the dream that was now irrevocably shattered. The hushed reverence of the showroom had vanished, replaced by a brittle silence that crackled with unspoken accusations. Eleanor stood before Marcus, her arms crossed, the polished gleam of the marble floor reflecting the sharp lines of her frustration. She had heard his admission to the team, a bitter truth that tasted like ash in her mouth. "Marcus," she began, her voice low, a controlled tremor beneath its professional veneer. "You told them you had no idea. You told them." The words hung in the air, heavy and accusing. She watched him, waiting for the bluster, the excuses. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted to grab him, to shake the answers out of him, but professionalism was the last thread holding her together. Marcus shifted his weight, his perfectly coiffed hair catching the showroom lights. A faint flush crept up his neck. "Eleanor, please." That was a moment of team building. We were exploring all possibilities, even the notion of a complete unknown. It's part of the diagnostic process for such a unique vehicle. He gestured vaguely towards the million-dollar car, now a silent monument to their collective failure, draped in a thin, custom-fitted cover. It sat on its pedestal, a phantom of its former glory. She clenched her jaw. "Team building? Marcus, we are bleeding money. Every day that car sits there, our reputation erodes. What are you actually doing?" Her gaze pierced him, demanding an honest answer, something she knew he was incapable of providing. The smell of expensive leather from the nearby vehicles seemed to mock her, a reminder of the dreams slipping away. He straightened his posture, a familiar arrogance returning to his eyes, a thin shield against his own incompetence. "We have explored the fuel injection system exhaustively. We have run full diagnostics on the primary ECU, checked every sensor from the active suspension to the thermal management, even the auxiliary climate control. This isn't some minor hiccup, Eleanor. This is a prototype-level anomaly. It requires a different approach." He paused, looking around as if searching for an invisible audience. "Perhaps specialized tools we do not possess, or maybe a team from the manufacturer itself. It is not our fault the car arrived with such a deeply ingrained, almost existential problem." Eleanor stared at him, her disappointment a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. "So you're saying you have no solutions, no plan, just excuses and more expenses?" She felt the blood drain from her face. His words were a mirror, reflecting her worst fears back at her. The thought that her father's legacy, built on precision and trust, was crumbling because of this man's inadequacy was a bitter pill. "I am saying," Marcus countered, puffing out his chest slightly, "that we are dealing with forces beyond a standard service bay's capabilities. This car is a temperamental beast, Eleanor. It does not respond to conventional methods." He offered a small, placating smile, a gesture that made her want to scream. She tasted metallic frustration in her mouth. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch moved through the periphery of the showroom, his worn-out janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the gleaming chrome and polished surfaces. He pushed his quiet cart, the rubber wheels making barely a whisper on the pristine marble. His hands, calloused from years of silent work, gripped the handle firmly. He was polishing a glass display case, his movements methodical, almost meditative. The faint scent of ammonia clung to the air around him, a clean counterpoint to the underlying aroma of new car and high-octane fuel. He had heard Marcus's pronouncements, the hollow ring of his confident words. Arthur's gaze drifted past his own reflection in the glass, settling on the shrouded million-dollar car. He remembered its arrival, a triumphant spectacle. He also remembered the subtle, almost imperceptible misfire he had heard when it was first driven into the service bay, a fleeting hesitation in the engine's symphony that no one else seemed to notice amidst the excitement. The technicians, in their eagerness, had dismissed it as transport stress. He had seen the way the diagnostic readouts flashed, momentary spikes in voltage that would disappear before anyone could pinpoint them. He had watched Marcus's team try to chase down phantom electrical issues, replace perfectly good sensors, and even disassemble parts of the exquisite carbon fiber body in search of a visible fault. They are looking for a broken bone, Arthur thought to himself, his inner voice calm and precise, when the problem is in the blood itself. He remembered the day the car finally refused to start, the frustrating clicks of the starter motor, the deep, disappointed groan of the engine. He had also noted the faint, acrid smell of burnt plastic lingering in the service bay that afternoon, a smell that had somehow escaped the attention of the experts. He knew it was not a fuel issue, not a common electrical short. The problem lay deeper, more insidious, likely in a system that communicated between the primary engine management and a critical auxiliary component, perhaps something related to the car's advanced kinetic energy recovery system or its sophisticated active aerodynamic controls. The car was too quiet now, too still. It was a patient slowly dying, and no one knew how to save it. He polished the glass, his reflections blurring and reforming, a silent observer in this unfolding tragedy. The weight of his own knowledge felt like a burden, a secret he was not allowed to share. His work continued as Eleanor's heated discussion with Marcus ended abruptly. She simply turned and walked away, her shoulders rigid, leaving Marcus standing alone, still feigning authority to an empty room. Eleanor's heels clicked sharply on the marble, each step a hammer blow to her dwindling hope. Arthur saw the set of her jaw, the barely contained fury in her eyes, a reflection of the same despair he felt when he recognized a fatal flaw in a design. He cleaned on, a phantom presence, his observations continuing unabated. Just as Eleanor disappeared into her office, the main showroom doors swung open, admitting a blast of crisp autumn air and a figure of imposing stature. Mr. Harrison Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with discerning taste and an even more discerning wallet, stepped inside. His suit was tailored to perfection, his shoes gleamed, and a subtle, expensive cologne preceded him. He was known for collecting hypercars, owning several models already. His assistant trailed behind him, holding a slim leather portfolio. Sarah Jenkins, the office manager, always composed and efficient, was the first to greet him. Her smile, usually warm, was a little strained today. "Mr. Thorne, welcome to Vance Luxury Motors. It's a pleasure to see you again." Mr. Thorne nodded curtly, his gaze sweeping over the array of gleaming vehicles, but clearly searching for something specific. "Sarah, I'm here to see the new Hyperion. I understand it arrived last week. Eleanor mentioned it might be available for a private viewing today." His voice was deep, authoritative, the kind that expected immediate compliance. Sarah's smile faltered. She glanced uneasily towards the covered car, then back at Mr. Thorne. Arthur, pretending to meticulously wipe down a chrome bumper nearby, listened intently. The air suddenly felt thinner, charged with an uncomfortable tension. "Ah, yes, the Hyperion," Sarah began, choosing her words carefully. "It is truly a magnificent machine. However, at this very moment, it is undergoing some final preparations, a few minor adjustments before its official unveiling." She winced slightly at her own words. The lie felt flimsy, transparent. The faint scent of polish and cleaning solution mixed with the sharp disappointment radiating from the potential client. Mr. Thorne raised an eyebrow, a clear sign of his displeasure. He walked slowly towards the pedestal, his expensive shoes tapping softly, a sound that amplified the silence. He peered at the car's shrouded form, his expression turning from anticipation to suspicion. "Minor adjustments, you say? It seems rather comprehensively covered for a minor adjustment." He circled the car, his eyes narrowing. "I was under the impression Vance Motors handled only the most perfectly prepared vehicles. Is there an issue I should be aware of, Sarah?" The pressure in the room was almost unbearable. Arthur kept his gaze fixed on the bumper he was cleaning, his hands moving with practiced ease, but every fiber of his being was attuned to the unfolding drama. He felt a pang of sympathy for Sarah, trapped in this impossible situation. Sarah wrung her hands slightly, an uncharacteristic gesture. "No, Mr. Thorne, not an issue at all. Simply a very, very thorough pre-delivery inspection. We are taking every precaution to ensure it meets our exacting standards." She tried another smile, but it looked forced, almost painful. Mr. Thorne stopped, facing Sarah directly. His voice dropped, losing its earlier pleasantry. "Sarah, I am a very busy man. I was assured this vehicle would be ready. I do not appreciate having my time wasted with vague platitudes." He gestured dismissively towards the covered car. "If it is not ready for viewing, simply say so. Do not insult my intelligence with euphemisms." He cast a cold glance around the showroom, his eyes lingering for a moment on Arthur, then dismissing him entirely. The silence that followed was thick with missed opportunity. "Perhaps another time, when your preparations are complete," Mr. Thorne stated, his tone final. He turned on his heel, his expensive coat swishing with his abrupt movement. His assistant, already accustomed to his employer's decisive nature, quickly followed. The showroom doors swung shut behind them with a soft sigh, leaving behind a vacuum of disappointment. Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. She looked at the covered car, then at Arthur, who offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. He saw the genuine distress in her eyes. The lost sale was not just a number. It was a visible wound. In her office, the silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the showroom's manufactured grandeur. Eleanor sat at her large, polished desk, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. The city outside buzzed with a relentless energy, but within these walls, only a profound quiet reigned. She looked at the framed photograph on her desk, a younger version of her father, beaming beside a freshly restored classic car, his arm around a much smaller Eleanor. His eyes in the picture were full of pride, of passion. Now her own eyes were clouded with unshed tears. The confrontation with Marcus had been pointless, a reiteration of his inability to lead. The departure of Mr. Thorne, a man whose business could have kept them afloat for months, was a tangible, immediate loss. She could almost feel the dealership shrinking around her, its walls closing in. The weight of her father's legacy, once a source of immense pride, now felt like an unbearable burden crushing her shoulders. She had fought, she had tried, but it was not enough. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek, tasting of salt and defeat. Then another, and another, until her vision blurred. She made no sound, just allowed the tears to flow, a silent internal unraveling. Her hands released their grip on each other, falling to her lap, limp and powerless. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the cool, smooth wood of her desk, the coldness a small anchor in the storm of her despair. The scent of her own expensive perfume, usually a comforting presence, now felt heavy and cloying, a reminder of the life that was so slowly slipping through her fingers. She closed her eyes, wishing for the strength that simply was not there anymore. The silence of the office absorbed her quiet sobs, a final testament to the overwhelming weight of impending failure. The crumpled sheet of paper lay half hidden beneath an overflowing bin in the service bay, a stark white against the gray concrete. Arthur Finch moved his mop with practiced ease, his eyes, however, caught by the familiar logo of the diagnostic machine at the top of the page. He knew the machine. He had once calibrated such devices with a precision few could match. A faint scent of stale coffee clung to the discarded report, a testament to the technician's long, fruitless hours. He paused, his calloused hand, usually stained with cleaning product, now reaching to retrieve the document, the rough texture of the paper a small detail his mind registered. His gaze scanned the columns of data, the engine codes, the sensor readings, the voltage fluctuations. Marcus and his team had been thorough, at least in their initial data collection. He saw the systematic checks they had performed, the components they had swapped, the software updates they had tried. Each entry was a step down a path he had already walked in his mind, tracing the symptoms back to their probable source. The hum of the fluorescent lights above him seemed to mock the futility of their efforts. A steady, indifferent drone. Then he saw it, a line innocuous to the untrained eye, nestled amongst a series of successful system checks. A minor fluctuation dismissed as ambient noise perhaps, or a glitch in the sensor. But Arthur knew better. He knew the intricate dance of these machines, the subtle conversations between components. This wasn't noise, it was a whisper, a critical oversight in the technician's analysis. They had looked for a roar, a blatant shout of failure, and ignored the quiet, insistent plea of a single, overburdened part. His breath hitched, a faint metallic taste rising in his throat as the pieces clicked into place. The solution, the real solution, was not about replacement, but about understanding the symphony, or rather the dissonance of the engine. He folded the report precisely, tucking it into his pocket, the corner of the paper pressing against his thigh like a secret. His janitorial closet was more than just a storage space for mops and buckets. It was a refuge, a small, dimly lit cell, where the world of gears and circuits still made sense. The air here was a familiar blend of lemon polish and the faint, comforting scent of old oil, a residue from the small, intricate engine part he kept hidden beneath a tarp. He locked the door behind him, the click resonating in the silence. The single bare bulb overhead cast harsh shadows, but Arthur found comfort in the gloom. He pulled out his worn notebook. its cover soft with age and grease. The pages a testament to a life lived in anonymity. He ran a thumb over the creased spine, a silent ritual. His pencil, sharpened to a needlepoint, danced across the page. He began with the diagnostic report's overlooked detail, sketching the specific circuit diagram, the connections, the power flow. The precise, almost artistic hand that could once draft blueprints for groundbreaking engines now flowed with quiet urgency. He could feel the engine's internal struggle, its desperate attempt to compensate for the failing component. It was like listening to a sick patient, discerning the subtle signs of distress. He drew arrows, circles, and annotations, each stroke building a mental model of the malfunction. The solution wasn't straightforward. It involved a cascading effect, where one small issue created a ripple through an entire system. Marcus's team had tried to fix the ripples without finding the stone. Arthur, however, saw the stone. The lead of the pencil scraped softly against the paper, a rhythmic sound that usually calmed him. But tonight it was a drumbeat, echoing a different, more painful rhythm in his memory. As he sketched the interaction between the fuel injection system and the delicate balance of sensor readings, a phantom chill snaked down his spine. The precise mathematical calculations required to recalibrate the system, to allow for the subtle defect without total failure, mirrored a problem he had faced once before, a problem he had failed to solve in time. The fluorescent bulb in the closet flickered, and for a terrifying second, Arthur was no longer in the Vance luxury motor service bay. He was back in a different garage, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear and burnt fuel. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The specific hum of an engine, identical to the one he was now diagnosing, before it had twisted into a strained, desperate gasp. The acrid smell of ozone, the sudden sickening shudder. His hands, then younger, more eager, fumbling with tools, the frantic search for a solution that never came. He heard the distant, muffled scream, felt the sudden, jarring impact that reverberated through his bones and through his soul. A tremor ran through his hands, threatening to snap the pencil lead. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the images back into the dark recesses of his mind where they usually resided. The face of the woman he had loved, her hopeful smile just moments before, now replaced by an image of unimaginable grief. He could still feel the crushing weight of responsibility, the profound failure that had stripped him of everything, leaving him with only the tattered remnants of a brilliant mind and a broken spirit. He had promised himself, vowed silently in the ashes of his life, that he would never again allow his talent, his passion for these powerful, dangerous machines, to bring such devastation. He opened his eyes, the small, cramped closet a stark contrast to the vivid, sprawling landscape of his memory. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, his chest tight with an unbearable ache. The intricate diagrams on the page, once a source of intellectual exhilaration, now felt like a dangerous siren song, luring him back to a precipice he had sworn to avoid. He was a janitor now, anonymous, safe from the crushing weight of consequence. He cleaned floors, emptied bins, and polished chrome, a quiet existence where the stakes were never higher than a misplaced mop. This was his penance, his sanctuary. But Eleanor Vance's tear-stained face, her quiet desperation, flashed before his eyes. He had seen the raw fear in her gaze, the crushing burden of a legacy she was fighting to save. He had heard her muffled sobs from her office, a sound that resonated with his own buried sorrow. This wasn't about a fleeting client or a boastful reputation. It was about survival, about hope, about the very heartbeat of a business that, despite its luxury facade, represented a dream. His gaze fell back to his notebook, to the precise, elegant solution he had outlined. It was so clear, so obvious to him, hidden in plain sight. He could see the gears turning, the fluids flowing, the electrical pulses firing, all in perfect, theoretical harmony if his solution was applied. The urge to act, to rectify, to apply his knowledge was a powerful, almost physical pull. It was the core of who he was, a mechanic, an engineer, a problem solver. It was a part of him that had been dormant for years, buried under layers of grief and self-imposed exile. The conflict raged within him. To step forward meant to re-engage with the world he had abandoned, to risk the agony of past failures, to expose the raw wound of his trauma. It meant acknowledging the genius he had worked so hard to hide. It meant leaving the quiet safety of his anonymity. Yet, to remain silent, to watch Eleanor's despair deepen, to see the dealership collapse when he held the key to its salvation, that felt like a different kind of failure, a betrayal of a different kind of promise. He pressed the notebook against his chest, the worn cover rough against his work shirt. The paper, still holding the faint ghost of the diagnostic machine's ink, felt fragile in his grasp. The weight of his past, the potential for future pain, and the silent plea of Eleanor's unspoken despair converged into an unbearable pressure. A single tear, born of profound pain and a terrifying glimpse of hope, traced a slow, silent path down his gaunt cheek, cutting through the faint grime and grease on his skin, a stark line of human vulnerability. He clutched his notebook tighter, wrestling with the impossible choice that lay before him. The low hum of fluorescent lights seemed to mock the silence in the service bay. Eleanor watched the first wave of external experts arrive, their vans emblazoned with sleek logos promising solutions, their technicians radiating an almost arrogant confidence. They were a team from engineered excellence, and their lead, a man named Richard with sharp eyes and a crisply ironed uniform, spoke in a tone that suggested all problems merely awaited his discerning gaze. Eleanor felt a faint, desperate flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the encroaching darkness that had become her world. The air, usually thick with the scent of oil and gasoline, now carried the sharp, chemical tang of expensive diagnostic equipment being unpacked. Richard and his crew moved with practiced efficiency around the million-dollar car. They brought out elaborate machines, their screens glowing with complex data, connecting a tangle of wires to every conceivable port on the vehicle. Eleanor stood a short distance away, her arms crossed, her breath held tight in her chest. She saw Richard tap a tablet, then frown slightly, his expression shifting from confident assurance to a subtle perplexity. One of his assistants, a younger man with nervous energy, rechecked a connection, muttering under his breath. The cost of their visit, already substantial, was ticking away with every second they spent in fruitless diagnosis. Eleanor felt the cold grip of anxiety tighten around her heart, a familiar companion these past few weeks. Marcus Thorne, standing nearby with his arms crossed, watched them intently, a flicker of smug satisfaction in his eyes when the experts hit their first snag. He had been so sure of his own team's capabilities, yet now he found himself in the unenviable position of having failed just as spectacularly. He cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Any luck, Richard? My team's already been over every system twice." His voice carried a false note of helpfulness, barely concealing the undercurrent of challenge. Richard merely grunted, not looking up from his screen. The tension in the bay was a living thing, thick and suffocating, clinging to the metallic scent of new tools and old despair. Arthur, sweeping the perimeter of the service bay, his movements as quiet and fluid as a shadow, observed it all. He saw the expert's initial approach, too broad, too reliant on generic system scans. He noted their focus on common failure points, ignoring the subtle indicators he had already cataloged in his mind. The ones that screamed manufacturing defect, not system malfunction. His broom whispered across the polished concrete, a rhythmic counterpoint to the frustrated clicks of the diagnostic equipment. A dull ache settled in his chest as he watched Eleanor's face, the hope draining from her eyes replaced by the familiar mask of deep, aching worry. He felt the weight of his own past, a similar mechanical failure that had cost him everything, pressing down on him. The memory tasted like ash in his mouth. Days turned into a blur of frantic activity and crushing disappointment. Engineered excellence eventually packed up, their leader Richard offering a vague explanation about intermittent anomalies and unique proprietary systems. They left Eleanor with a bill that would have bought a small, reliable family car and absolutely no solution. The air felt colder, thinner after they departed. Eleanor slumped against a workbench, the hard metal digging into her hip, but she hardly noticed. The despair was a physical ache, a dull throb behind her eyes and a hollowness in her stomach. Then came the second wave of experts. This time, a duo from Global Automotive Diagnostics, specializing in hypercars. They arrived in a slightly less ostentatious vehicle, but their tools looked even more futuristic, their demeanor more serious. One, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes, had a sharp, analytical mind, her questions probing and precise. The other, a quiet man named Thomas, moved around the car like a surgeon, his gloved hands examining every visible component. Eleanor allowed herself another sliver of hope, even as the memory of the previous failure gnawed at her. The showroom, usually a beacon of ambition and success, now felt like a tomb, each gleaming vehicle a silent witness to the impending collapse. Dr. Hayes connected a device that looked like a sleek black box to the car's main diagnostic port. A ripple of green and blue lines flowed across its screen, depicting complex data streams. She conferred in hushed, technical tones with Thomas, their brows furrowed in concentration. They spent an entire day meticulously testing individual circuits, running simulations, and even bringing in a specialized camera to examine internal components without full disassembly. Eleanor watched them with a desperate intensity, every flicker of their expressions scrutinized for a sign of progress, a hint of understanding. She could smell the faint, metallic ozone from their high-tech equipment mixing with the underlying scent of the showroom's expensive leather. Her throat was dry, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. Meanwhile, Marcus grew increasingly agitated. He hovered around the experts, offering unsolicited advice, pointing out things they had already checked, his voice growing sharper, more insistent. "Are you sure you checked the fuel pressure regulators? We ran into a similar issue on a high-end sedan last year." Dr. Hayes would offer him a polite yet firm dismissal, turning back to her work. His own team, already demoralized, avoided his gaze. He snapped at a young technician, James, for misplacing a small wrench. "This isn't a game, James. These are professionals. We can't be wasting their time with your sloppiness." His voice echoed in the cavernous space, a grating sound against the quiet focus of the experts. He felt his own reputation crumbling around him. Every failed diagnostic a testament to his own teams, and by extension, his own inadequacy. Arthur, polishing this chrome trim on a nearby sports car, listened to Marcus's increasingly frantic pronouncements. He heard the forced bravado, the thinly veiled panic. He noted how Dr. Hayes and Thomas were good, very good indeed, but their methodology was still rooted in system-level troubleshooting. They were looking for a broken circuit, a faulty sensor, a software glitch. They were not looking for the source of the issue, the one tiny, almost invisible flaw that could throw an entire complex system into disarray. His own insights, scribbled in his greasy notebook, pointed to something far more fundamental: a slight deviation from design specifications, a manufacturing imperfection rather than a component failure. The knowledge felt heavy in his mind, a secret burden. That evening, as the second team of experts continued their laborious work, Sarah found Eleanor in her office, staring blankly at a spreadsheet that outlined the dealership's rapidly dwindling reserves. The figures swam before her eyes, each number a stab of fresh pain. Sarah placed a steaming mug of tea on her desk, the warmth a small comfort against the chill of despair that permeated the room. "You need to eat something, Eleanor," Sarah said, her voice soft, filled with genuine concern. "You haven't had a proper meal all day." Eleanor just shook her head, a tired sigh escaping her lips. The air in the office was stale, heavy with unspoken fears, a stark contrast to the showroom's usual vibrant energy. "What's the point, Sarah?" Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse from lack of use and raw emotion. "They've been here 2 days. They're just as stumped as Marcus. And the bill? I don't even want to look at the bill." She pushed the mug away, the scent of chamomile doing little to soothe her frazzled nerves. Sarah pulled up a chair, her presence a steady anchor in Eleanor's swirling chaos. "Maybe we should consider other options. Leasing out some of the showroom space, selling off some of the older inventory, anything to buy us more time." Sarah's suggestions were practical, sensible, yet Eleanor knew they were merely delaying the inevitable, putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. The dealership wasn't just a business. It was her father's legacy, a monument to their family's passion, and she felt its lifeblood draining away, drop by agonizing drop. "We need the car fixed, Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. "That car is the heart of this place right now. Without it, we're just another empty showroom, selling dreams we can't deliver." Her fingers traced the worn wood of her desk, a relic from her father's time. The pressure on her shoulders felt immense, crushing, as if the weight of the entire building rested upon her. She imagined her father, his proud smile, his firm handshake. How could she face him, even in memory, if she let his life's work vanish? A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cold cheek, leaving a faint salty taste on her lips. She longed for a solution, any solution, or to pull her from this suffocating vortex of hopelessness. The next morning, the service bay was quiet once more. Dr. Hayes and Thomas stood by the $1 million car, their shoulders slumped. The confident energy they had arrived with had completely evaporated, replaced by an air of resigned defeat. They had exhausted every diagnostic test, every theory, every specialized tool. Nothing. The car remained a magnificent, silent enigma. Eleanor approached them slowly, her footsteps echoing in the hushed space. She braced herself for the inevitable, her heart sinking deeper with each step. The smell of cold metal and failed ambition filled her nostrils. Dr. Hayes met her gaze, her expression apologetic. "Ms. Vance," she began, her voice low, "we have thoroughly examined every system, every component, every line of code accessible to us. We have run every known diagnostic protocol for this model and several proprietary ones." She paused, then continued. "The car's onboard systems report no errors. Mechanically, structurally, electrically, it appears flawless, yet it remains inert." Thomas nodded grimly beside her. The words hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, each one echoing the finality of their pronouncement. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. "So, you can't fix it?" Eleanor's voice was a mere whisper, barely audible above the faint buzz of the service bay lights. The question hung in the air, heavy and full of dread. Dr. Hayes sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We have identified no discernible fault within the parameters of what is considered a repairable issue for a vehicle of this complexity. Our analysis indicates no system failure. It's beyond our scope." The words were professional, clinical, but to Eleanor they sounded like a death knell. The scent of failure was palpable, clinging to the pristine surfaces of the car and the very air around them. As the global automotive diagnostics team began to pack their equipment, their movements slow and deliberate, Eleanor watched them go, her vision blurred. She stood there, frozen, her mind a blank canvas of despair. The sleek black diagnostic box was placed carefully back into its case. Wires were coiled, tools were stowed. Thomas offered her a small, sympathetic nod before he followed Dr. Hayes out of the bay. They drove away in their professional, discreet vehicle, leaving behind a silence far heavier than their initial presence. The $1 million car sat under the harsh fluorescent lights, a beautiful, lifeless monument to an impossible problem. A problem that had now claimed the best and brightest. Eleanor felt utterly defeated, stripped bare of all hope, the crushing weight of impending failure settling over her like a shroud. The cold, sterile echo of the departing expert's footsteps left a chilling silence in the service bay. Eleanor stood alone, the air thick with the faint, metallic scent of their failed efforts. A bitter tang that burned in her nostrils. Her shoulders slumped, a heavy weight pressing down on her as she stared at the sleek, unmoving form of the $1 million car. It sat there, a silent, beautiful monument to impending ruin. She ran a hand through her hair, the strands catching on her slightly damp forehead. Every specialist, every high-priced consultant had offered nothing but vague excuses and inflated bills. Her vision blurred for a moment, the polished chrome of the car shimmering through unshed tears. The finality of their failure settled over her like a shroud. She had exhausted every option, every contact, every last shred of hope she thought she possessed. The bank's deadline loomed closer with each tick of the clock, a relentless, unforgiving countdown. She felt a tremor deep in her bones, a cold fear that began to spread through her veins. This could not be the end. Not for her father's legacy, not for the dreams he had poured into every pane of glass, every gleaming tile of the showroom. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of the car, but its outline remained seared behind her eyelids. The following morning brought a fresh wave of dread, heavier than the one before. The scent of ozone from a distant thunderstorm hung low in the air, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere inside Vance Luxury Motors. Sarah, ever practical, had placed a neatly typed itinerary on Eleanor's desk. The first item, highlighted in red, read, 10 a.m., investor meeting with Mr. Harrison, $1 million car demonstration. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Mr. Harrison was not just an investor. He was a titan of industry, a man whose word carried the weight of gold and whose patience was notoriously thin. He had been a friend of her father's for decades, a man who had seen the dealership grow from a small, ambitious venture into a prestigious institution. Now he represented its last fragile hope. His assistant had called just after dawn, leaving a message that confirmed Mr. Harrison's exacting expectations. He had specifically stated that he wished to see the crown jewel of the collection, the hypercar that had drawn so much attention, purring to life and performing exactly as promised. He wanted proof that the investment was sound, that the future of Vance Luxury Motors was viable. There would be no excuses, no deferrals, no technical jargon to hide behind. Eleanor could almost hear his gravelly voice in her mind, a low rumble that conveyed immense power and zero tolerance for failure. He did not invest in potential. He invested in certainty. And right now, certainty was a luxury she simply could not afford. Eleanor walked through the showroom, the hushed reverence of the space feeling like a hollow mockery. Each polished surface reflected her own anxious face, a kaleidoscope of worry. The gleaming cars, usually a source of pride, now seemed to stare back with accusing eyes. She found Marcus in the service bay, barking orders at his already despondent team. The air was thick with their collective frustration, a palpable tension that made the fluorescent lights seem to flicker more intensely. Marcus had a wrench in his hand, though he was not actively using it, merely gripping it with white knuckles. His brow was furrowed, a vein throbbing visibly on his temple. His usual swagger had been replaced by a thin veneer of desperation. "Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper against the clang of a dropped tool in the background. Her throat felt tight, as if a fist had closed around it. She tried to project authority, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Her fingers locked around the cup of lukewarm coffee she held, a desperate anchor. She knew if she let go, she would spill it all over her pristine white blouse. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the pervasive scent of oil and cleaning solvents, an unsettling cocktail. Marcus turned, his eyes bloodshot, his face a mask of exhaustion and irritation. "Eleanor," he replied, his tone, devoid of its usual condescension, replaced by a weary resignation. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and found nothing. The scent of sweat and desperation seemed to cling to him. "Mr. Harrison arrives at 10, she continued, her voice catching on the words. She had to force them out, one by one. "He wants to see the car. Running. Perfect." She swallowed hard, the simple words feeling like an impossible demand. The weight of her father's name, the weight of her entire family's legacy, pressed down on her. It felt as though the very walls of the dealership were leaning in, threatening to crush her. Marcus ran a hand over his face, leaving a smudge of grease on his cheek. He looked utterly defeated. "Eleanor, we've tried everything," he said, his voice raw. "Every diagnostic, every bypass, every theoretical fix. The external guys, they just confirm what we already knew. This car, it's a ghost. There's no physical reason it shouldn't start, but it won't. It just sits there laughing at us." He kicked a loose lug nut across the floor, the metallic clatter echoing the hollow sound of his words. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to an urgent, pleading tone, a desperate, last-ditch plea for a miracle. "Marcus, please," she begged, her eyes wide, brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Her chin trembled slightly. "You have to. There is no other option. If Mr. Harrison doesn't see that car working, if he doesn't walk away convinced, then it's over, everything. This whole place, my father's work, our livelihoods, all of it gone." The air around them grew heavy, charged with unspoken fears. She could feel the chill of the concrete floor seeping through the thin soles of her expensive shoes. She could taste the salt of her tears, even though they remained unshed. Her chest ached with the effort of holding herself together. She felt utterly exposed, her vulnerability laid bare before him. Marcus, for his part, could only stare back, his own despair mirroring hers. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, shaking his head slowly. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where hope once resided. He could offer no reassurances, no last-minute flashes of inspiration. The raw, guttural sound of a car horn from the street outside seemed to punctuate their shared, crushing defeat. Arthur, pushing his cleaning cart with his familiar creaks and squeaks, moved silently through the deserted corridor that ran adjacent to Eleanor's office. The scent of industrial cleaner clung to his uniform, a stark contrast to the expensive perfumes and leathers that usually permeated these halls. His hands, calloused and strong, gripped the handle of the cart, his movements methodical and practiced. He had heard the raised voices, the strained tones, emanating from the open door of Eleanor's office. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the sound carried a sharp, painful edge to Eleanor's voice that he could not ignore. He paused near the door, his posture still, his breath shallow. The muted clink of his keys against his belt was the only sound he made. He could make out snippets of the conversation, fragmented words that painted a grim picture. Investor, tomorrow, failed. And then, clearest of all, Eleanor's raw, trembling plea to Marcus. Her voice, usually so composed, was laced with an agony that resonated deep within Arthur. He recognized that sound, the desperate, hollow ache of a person on the brink of losing everything. It was a sound he knew all too well from his own past, a chilling echo of his deepest trauma. He heard the rising inflection of her voice, the pleading quality that stripped away all her professional veneer. He felt the cold air from the vents on his skin, a stark reminder of the impersonal nature of the building, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its walls. He stood there, frozen, the weight of her despair settling heavily on his own shoulders. He caught the faint, sweet scent of Eleanor's perfume, a fleeting hint of elegance amidst the desperation. The knowledge of the investor's ultimatum, combined with Eleanor's evident anguish, struck him with the force of a physical blow. The car had to be fixed. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was the lifeline of this entire establishment, of every person working here. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere in the service bay felt colder than usual, despite the stifling humidity outside. The fluorescent lights seemed to hum a dirge. Eleanor stood before her assembled staff, her face pale, almost translucent, her eyes shadowed with profound exhaustion. The usual buzz of activity had died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Marcus stood slightly to her left, his head bowed, his hands shoved into his pockets. Sarah stood protectively by Eleanor's side, her expression a mixture of worry and quiet resolve. The scent of fear was almost palpable, mingling with the ever-present aroma of oil and rubber. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath, her chest rising and falling visibly. She clasped her hands together, her knuckles white, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. She looked at each face in the room, her gaze lingering on the mechanics who had toiled tirelessly, fruitlessly, for weeks. She saw their tired eyes, their slumped shoulders, their own quiet resignation. The polished concrete floor felt strangely unsteady beneath her feet. The air was so still, she could almost hear the frantic beating of her own heart. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost broken, yet it carried an undeniable finality that cut through the silence like a sharp blade. I have to tell you something, she began, her chin quivering. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. It was a testament to the depth of her despair, a public acknowledgement of her crushing defeat. The taste of salt was sharp on her lips. She could feel the heat of everyone's gaze on her, a collective weight of expectation and fear. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to continue, her voice gaining a fragile strength. Mr. Harrison, our primary investor, is coming tomorrow morning. Her gaze swept across the room again. He expects to see the $1 million car working. She paused, another shaky breath escaping her lips. The words felt like ash in her mouth. The profound weight of the truth settled heavily in the room, suffocating every last glimmer of hope. Her eyes, now shimmering with unshed tears, met those of her staff, conveying the gravity of her next statement without needing to say it. The air grew thick, almost impossible to breathe. The cold weight of the silence pressed down on everyone. Then, with a heartbreaking tremor that exposed every ounce of her vulnerability, Eleanor finally uttered the words that sealed their fate. "If that car isn't fixed by tomorrow, this dealership, Vance Luxury Motors, will be forced to close its doors forever." Eleanor's final words had echoed in the service bay, hanging heavy in the humid air like a death knell. Arthur Finch watched her turn, her posture a silent testament to utter defeat. Her shoulders were slumped, a sharp contrast to the composed professionalism she usually wore like armor. He saw the slight tremor in her hands as she pushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of weary resignation. The fluorescent lights above cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to swallow her hope whole as she walked away from the stunned faces of her staff. He could almost feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, the unspoken plea for a miracle etched into the very curve of her back. The air around him suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. His gaze drifted down to his own hands, gnarled and calloused from years of scrubbing floors, handling harsh cleaning chemicals, and countless small repairs for a living that kept him invisible. These hands, however, had once been precise instruments, capable of coaxing life back into the most complex machinery, sensing the subtle nuances of an engine's heartbeat. He clenched them into fists, feeling the ache of old scars under his skin. Then his eyes lifted to the silent, magnificent machine at the center of the bay. The million-dollar car. Its sleek, deep crimson body seemed to mock them all, a monument to their collective failure, a symbol of Eleanor's impending ruin. A profound, unsettling sense of responsibility began to stir deep within his gut, a cold, insistent hand squeezing his chest. The sight of the lifeless vehicle, so full of potential yet utterly inert, dragged him back to another time, another place, a memory he had meticulously buried beneath years of routine and anonymity. The service bay's clamor faded, replaced by the ghost of a different engine's roar, then a chilling, abrupt silence. He was back in the garage, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and oil, the sun streaming through a high window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden light. He was younger then, full of a fierce, almost arrogant confidence in his abilities. His fingers stained with grease, but nimble and knowing. His project, his masterpiece, sat on the lift. A vintage racing car, a labor of love for weeks, tuned to perfection for the upcoming local championship. He had poured every ounce of his skill, every hour of his waking life into that engine, certain of its flawless performance. His younger brother, Michael, had been there, always a shadow of pure admiration, eyes wide with trust and excitement. Michael's laughter had been the soundtrack to Arthur's work, a bright, clear sound that filled the space with life. That morning, everything had felt right. The engine hummed with a powerful, consistent rhythm, a symphony of pistons and gears working in perfect harmony. Arthur had meticulously checked every hose, every connection, every bolt, twice, 3 times, his meticulous nature demanding absolute certainty. Michael, barely 14, had clambered into the passenger seat, his smile infectious, his small hands gripping the dashboard in anticipation. "Ready, Art? Ready to show them all?" he had shouted over the glorious rumble, his voice brimming with unshakable faith. Arthur remembered the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of the open road stretching before them, the wind whipping through their hair as they pushed the car to its limits on the practice track. The world blurred into a vibrant streak of green and blue. He felt a profound sense of exhilaration, of complete control, of shared joy with his brother. This was their dream, their future, manifesting in speed and precision. Then a sudden, jarring change in the engine's note. A subtle cough, a hesitant stutter, a sound only a highly trained ear like Arthur's could discern amidst the roar. His heart had lurched, a cold dread snaking through his veins. He had glanced at the gauges, his eyes scanning for any anomaly, but they showed nothing amiss. Michael, oblivious, had cheered louder, urging him faster. Arthur had dismissed it, a fleeting anomaly, a trick of the wind, perhaps. He told himself he had checked everything. It had to be fine. He could not let doubt creep in. Not now. He had pushed it just a little more. The finish line of the practice lap was in sight. Then a violent metallic shriek that tore through the air, followed by a sickening thud. The engine died abruptly with a guttural gasp, and the car lurches wildly, spinning out of control. The world became a chaotic blur of twisted metal and shattering glass. The piercing sound of Michael's cry, sharp and desperate, echoed in his ears, then silence. A terrible, absolute silence. He remembered the smell of burning oil and blood, the feel of rough asphalt against his cheek, the searing pain in his leg, and the even deeper, colder pain in his chest. When he finally managed to drag himself from the wreckage, every muscle screaming in protest, he saw it. The crucial component, a seemingly minor fuel line he had installed himself, had failed catastrophically. A hair-thin crack imperceptible to the naked eye during his frantic checks had ruptured under pressure. It was his oversight, his confidence, his fatal error. Michael lay still, too still, amidst the twisted steel. The laughter, the vibrant life, extinguished in a single devastating moment, all because of a detail he had missed, a flaw he had overlooked. The memory was a barbed hook, tearing at his insides, raw and relentless. He could still feel the cold weight of Michael's lifeless hand in his, could still hear the desperate, ragged cries torn from his own throat. The guilt had been a living, breathing thing, wrapping its tendrils around his heart, squeezing the life out of his ambition, his joy, his very identity. He had chosen anonymity then, a janitor's uniform, a disguise, a penance. He had hidden his hands, his mind, his genius, lest he ever cause such devastation again. The cost of a mistake, he had learned, was immeasurable. Now, standing in the bright, sterile service bay of Vance Luxury Motors, the echoes of Eleanor's despair seemed to merge with the phantom cries of his past. The million-dollar car sat before him, a different machine, a different failure, but the stakes felt horrifyingly similar. Eleanor, like Michael, had placed her trust, her entire future, in the hands of others, in the presumed infallibility of machinery. And like Arthur's own past, the experts had failed her. They had missed something. He knew they had. He felt it in his bones, a familiar ache of recognition. His mind, sharp and analytical even in distress, began to race. He had seen the diagnostic reports, the frantic, baffled expressions of Marcus and his team. He had overheard their theories, their desperate, often misguided attempts. They were looking for the grand failure, the obvious breakdown, the complex system collapse. But sometimes he knew it was the smallest, most overlooked detail, the hair-thin crack in a fuel line, the subtle vibration in a bearing, the almost invisible corrosion on a contact that brought everything to a halt. The kind of detail that only an obsessive, hyper-vigilant mind, one scarred by past errors, would even think to seek out. He remembered Eleanor's face, pale and strained, her voice trembling as she spoke of the dealership's closure. He remembered the faint, almost imperceptible dark circles under her eyes, the way she clutched her hands, trying to project a strength she no longer possessed. She was fighting for her family's legacy, for the livelihoods of everyone who worked there, for a dream that was slowly dying. His inaction, his continued silence, would be another form of complicity, another shadow cast by his past. It would be another Michael, lost to an avoidable mechanical failure, lost to his own fear. A wave of nausea washed over him, the conflicting currents of fear and duty battling within him. To step forward meant exposing himself, peeling back the layers of anonymity he had painstakingly built. It meant facing the possibility of failure again, of public scrutiny, of having his hidden world shattered. What if he was wrong? What if he intervened, only to make things worse? The ghost of Michael's face, pale and accusing, flickered in his mind. The thought was paralyzing. He had sworn never to touch another complex engine again, never to be responsible for such a critical failure. But then a different image surfaced. Eleanor's bowed head, the quiet dignity of her despair, the palpable weight of her silent plea. He heard not Michael's cries but the unsaid prayers of a woman on the precipice of losing everything. He had seen the dedication in her eyes, the way she spoke about her family's history, the pride she held for this place. She was fighting a battle she could not win alone. And he, Arthur Finch, held the key, a hidden truth known only to him. The weight of her impending loss pressed down on him, heavier than any fear of exposure. His hands, still clenched, began to tremble, not from fear, but from a burgeoning, unfamiliar resolve. The years of self-imposed exile, of denying his true calling, had been a penance. But was this continued silence another sin, a betrayal of the gift he possessed? Was it truly protecting him, or merely prolonging his torment, allowing others to suffer when he held the power to alleviate it? He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the metallic scent of the service bay, the faint echo of cleaning solution from his janitorial cart. He opened them again, and the crimson hypercar seemed to shimmer under the lights, no longer a monument to failure, but a challenge, a silent question demanding an answer. The answer was not about him, not about his past, not about his fear. It was about Eleanor. It was about righting a wrong, not just for her, but for the ghost of Michael, for the mechanic he once was, and for the man he could still become. The decision was made, slowly, painfully, but irrevocably. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but something else had risen to meet it. A quiet fury, a deep-seated determination to prevent another avoidable tragedy. He would not stand by and watch another life, another legacy, be destroyed by a mechanical oversight, especially when he held the knowledge to prevent it. He had hidden long enough. The time for anonymity was over. Arthur took a deep, ragged breath, the air filling his lungs with renewed purpose. His eyes, once haunted and averted, now fixed themselves on the car with an intense, unwavering resolve, a flicker of something long dormant hardening his gaze. The hushed reverence of the showroom, usually filled with the soft murmur of ambition and the glint of expensive metal, had given way to an oppressive quiet. Eleanor Vance stood at the edge of the service bay, facing her assembled staff. The polished concrete floor felt impossibly cold beneath her thin dress shoes, a chill that mirrored the growing despair in her own chest. Every face before her held a mixture of fear and profound sadness, a reflection of the truth she was about to speak. She could feel the weight of their gaze, 1,000 unspoken questions and laments pressing down on her, each one a tiny barb in her already lacerated heart. A faint scent of burnt oil and spent ambition hung in the air, a cruel reminder of their collective failure. She had practiced the words 100 times in the lonely hours before dawn, staring at the ceiling of her empty apartment. But now they felt clumsy and inadequate on her tongue. Her throat was tight, a knot of grief and unfulfilled promises refusing to loosen. She could hear the shallow rhythm of her own breathing, a fragile sound in the overwhelming stillness of the room. A stray beam of sunlight, weak and pale, cut through the large glass windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the human tragedy unfolding below. Her gaze drifted past her employees, past the familiar faces of the sales team, the administrative staff, the mechanics with their oil-stained uniforms. She saw Sarah, her loyal office manager, standing a little to the side, her expression a careful blend of sorrow and unwavering support. Sarah's eyes, usually so bright and full of quiet determination, were now clouded with a deep, resigned sadness. Eleanor felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt for letting them all down, for failing the legacy her family had built with painstaking effort and boundless dreams. The responsibility felt like a physical burden, pressing her shoulders down, making her feel small and insignificant. Then her eyes met Marcus Thorne, the chief technician, who stood a few feet away, his usual bravado completely stripped away. He looked like a man made of stone, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. The confident smirk that typically played on his lips was gone, replaced by a grimace of utter defeat. His hands, usually so busy with tools or gestures of authority, hung uselessly at his sides, clenched into tight, frustrated fists. The crisp white of his technician's uniform seemed to mock his current state, pristine and untouched by the grime of successful labor. He offered no last-minute solutions, no desperate assurances. There was only a hollow silence where his usual boastful claims might have been. The air around him felt thick with his own unspoken shame, a heavy shroud. Eleanor thought of the sleek million-dollar car sitting inert and silent in the service bay, a monument to their failure. Its deep crimson paint, usually so vibrant and alluring, now seemed to mock her, a silent accusation of all the opportunities lost, all the hope extinguished. The car, which was meant to be their triumph, had become their undoing, a silent, beautiful killer of dreams. She swallowed hard, trying to moisten her parched throat, the taste of metallic despair sharp on her tongue. The silence in the room stretched, growing heavier with each passing second, amplifying the thumping rhythm of her own terrified heart. She opened her mouth, the words poised to rip from her, an announcement of closure, of defeat, of the end of everything she and her family had ever worked for. The first syllable was already forming on her lips, a choked, raspy sound, when a subtle shift in the atmosphere registered. It was not a loud noise, not a sudden movement, but a ripple of uneasy recognition, a collective, almost imperceptible turn of heads from the back of the room. The fragile moment, already hanging by a thread, felt suddenly altered, disrupted by an unexpected presence. Eleanor paused, her breath catching, her gaze drawn unwillingly towards the source of the subtle disturbance. Arthur Finch, still clad in his unassuming janitor's uniform, had taken a single, deliberate step forward from the shadows at the very rear of the service bay. His worn work boots made a soft scuffing sound on the polished concrete, a surprisingly loud noise in the suffocating silence. He had been standing there, a quiet sentinel, for what felt like an eternity, his presence almost invisible amidst the array of tools and equipment. He had watched Eleanor's face crumble, had seen the raw agony in her eyes as she prepared to extinguish the last flicker of hope. Her quiet suffering had resonated deeply within him, stirring the long, dormant echoes of his own past pain, a familiar ache of helplessness that he knew all too well. The fluorescent lights, usually so harsh and unforgiving, seemed to soften around him for a fleeting moment, creating a halo effect around his slightly stooped figure. His hands, calloused and strong from years of physical labor, were clasped loosely in front of him, betraying no outward sign of the turmoil he felt. But inside, his stomach churned with a nervous energy he had not felt in years. The air tasted metallic and sharp on his tongue, a sensation he associated with moments of profound decision, moments where the world seemed to hold its breath. He could hear the almost frantic pulse thrumming in his ears, a counterpoint to the absolute stillness of the room. He had spent the last agonizing minutes wrestling with the ghosts of his past, the haunting images of another mechanical failure, another life irrevocably altered by a single critical flaw. He remembered the metallic tang of fear, the suffocating grip of regret. He remembered the desperate helplessness, the knowledge that he possessed the power to prevent tragedy, yet remained frozen. That memory, sharp and vivid, had clawed at him, a relentless torment. Now, watching Eleanor, so young, so burdened, on the precipice of her own devastation, he knew he could not stand by again. The thought of letting her fall, of allowing that same crushing despair to consume her as it had once consumed him, was unbearable. He took another step, then another, his quiet movement drawing the eyes of every single person in the room. Heads turned slowly, almost in unison, a wave of confused recognition sweeping through the staff. First, it was just a flicker of movement in their peripheral vision, a disruption of the expected tableau. Then, as he continued his slow, unwavering advance, a collective murmur, hushed and questioning, began to ripple through the room. Some looked at him with plain confusion, wondering why the janitor was moving towards the front at such a solemn moment. Others, perhaps more perceptive, saw a flicker of purpose in his usually downcast eyes, a strange, uncharacteristic resolve. Marcus Thorne, his face still a mask of defeat, shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing slightly as he registered Arthur's approach. A spark of irritation, of familiar, dismissive anger, began to stir in his defeated posture. He probably assumed Arthur was simply moving to clean something, or perhaps making some kind of clumsy, misguided attempt at offering comfort. The idea that this quiet, unassuming man, the cleaner, could have any relevance at this critical juncture would have been utterly alien to Marcus's way of thinking. The chief technician's gaze held a hint of annoyance, a slight tightening around his mouth as if to say, "Not now, Arthur." Eleanor watched him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and utter bewilderment. Her carefully constructed speech had been interrupted, her moment of profound public failure unexpectedly delayed. She saw Arthur, the janitor who moved through the showroom like a ghost, always present but never truly seen. She registered the worn fabric of his uniform, the slight limp in his gait, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. What could he possibly want? A surge of impatience born of her immense stress flared briefly within her, quickly extinguished by the deeper current of her sorrow. She simply waited, her heart still thrumming with the fear of the words she needed to speak. Arthur stopped just a few paces from the inert crimson hypercar, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the staff, then settling firmly on Eleanor. The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire humming with unspoken questions and mounting disbelief. The air felt heavy, charged with the collective anticipation of Eleanor's inevitable announcement, now momentarily suspended. Arthur could feel the prickle of their stares, the weight of their scrutiny, but his resolve held firm. He could taste the dried dust in his mouth, a faint, almost metallic flavor that seemed to ground him in the present moment. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above him was the only sound for what felt like an eternity. He took a single, deep breath, drawing strength from the memory of his past, from the pain he was determined to prevent others from enduring. He looked directly at Eleanor, his quiet eyes holding a depth she had never noticed before. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the heavy, despair-filled silence like a surgeon's scalpel. It held an unexpected certainty, a quiet, unwavering conviction that resonated in the stunned air. Every ear strained to catch the impossible words. Every heart seemed to skip a beat in the sudden, shocking realization of what had just been said. "I know what's wrong with it." Arthur's quiet declaration brought a suffocating silence. Every eye, heavy with despair and disbelief, fixed on his unassuming frame. Eleanor Vance felt her heart lurch. His voice had been steady, yet her mind struggled to connect the janitor with such weighty words. The harsh fluorescent lights exposed the lingering sting of tears in her eyes. She had been so close to utter collapse. A sharp bark of laughter shattered the stillness. Marcus Thorne, the chief technician, pushed off the car, arms crossed. His laugh held only contempt, masking panic. "You?" Marcus scoffed, his voice incredulous. He stepped closer, casting his shadow over Arthur. "The janitor? What could you know about an engine like this? Are you suggesting we, the professionals, missed something elementary?" His eyes, usually self-assured, darted to his bewildered team, seeking affirmation. Junior technicians exchanged uncomfortable glances. Eleanor felt fresh humiliation. This was the final indignity, the last gasp of her family's legacy. She wanted to stop Arthur, to tell him to step back, but words caught in her throat. A desperate curiosity held her. Why say this? What was he thinking? The familiar scent of old oil and cleaning solvent made the surreal moment sharper. Arthur Finch did not flinch. His gaze remained steady, fixed on the gleaming, silent hypercar, not Marcus. He reached into his worn uniform pocket and pulled out a small, grease-stained notebook. Its cover was soft with age, its edges frayed. His calloused fingers handled it with surprising tenderness. A quiet hum of uncertain conversation rippled through the staff, but Arthur seemed oblivious. "The intermittent power loss," Arthur began, his quiet voice gaining unwavering authority. "It is not a primary circuit failure, nor a fuel delivery issue, as your diagnostics indicated." He paused. His eyes met Eleanor's, seeing skepticism, fear, and a faint spark of hope. He knew that spark was enough. "We ran every test," Marcus interjected, face reddening. "ECU logs, voltage regulators, fuel pressure sensors. Everything was within parameters, with sporadic anomalies we could not isolate." He gestured wildly at the diagnostic equipment, screens displaying dizzying data. "This is a ghost in the machine, beyond standard troubleshooting." Arthur slowly opened his notebook, pages filled with intricate diagrams and calculations. He turned to a specific page, tracing a complex drawing with his finger. The problem lies within the harmonic balancer's integrated sensor array, he stated, his voice factual. Micro vibrations from the engine's idle cycle cause a phase shift in the optical encoder's feedback loop. This is not a direct failure, but cumulative signal degradation, presenting as intermittent power loss under load. Eleanor felt a jolt. His words were precise, technical, baffling. Yet his tone held a conviction and clarity absent from every prior explanation she had heard. She looked at Marcus. His face had gone pale, the confident sneer replaced by bewildered frustration. He processed Arthur's explanation, brow furrowed, mouth slightly open. The metallic tang of fear filled the air. Optical encoder's feedback loop, Marcus stammered, his voice losing its usual booming confidence. He tried a weak, strangled laugh. That is highly specialized. Our equipment would not flag that unless it was a complete malfunction. He looked at his technicians, then Arthur, searching for a flaw. His expensive uniform suddenly felt tight. Arthur simply tapped a point on his diagram. Exactly. It is sub-threshold degradation. The system corrects minor fluctuations, but this specific harmonic resonance at 1,850 RPM creates consistent, subtle interference. Over time, the ECU compensates incorrectly. This leads to delayed ignition timing and insufficient fuel injection at specific points. That is why it occurs intermittently under certain driving conditions. His quiet voice filled the vast service bay. The specificity of Arthur's explanation hung in the air, contrasting with weeks of vague pronouncements. Eleanor felt awe surge through her. Her tightly clenched hands grew damp with sweat. She had been close to losing everything, and this janitor spoke with authority far beyond her highly paid technicians. The scent of fear in the room now radiated from Marcus. The diagnostic tools, Arthur elaborated, still not looking up from his notebook, are programmed for common failure modes. They look for outright breaks, complete shorts, or significant deviations. They do not account for a gradual, subtle breakdown in a specific, high-tolerance component operating within a narrow frequency band. He closed his notebook with a soft click, meeting Marcus's eyes. The data is there if you know what to look for, not as an error code, but anomalous microfluctuations in sensor output graphs, often dismissed as signal noise. Marcus took a step back, his face showing disbelief, anger, and dawning realization. He ran a hand through his hair. The air felt thick with unspoken truth. He thought he knew the system, trained on this model. Yet Arthur described an obscure, almost theoretical detail only a dedicated expert would know. The bitter taste of professional humiliation filled his mouth. Eleanor felt a different sensation, a fragile hope pushing through her despair. She truly looked at Arthur for the first time. His quiet eyes, worn uniform, and hands that cleaned floors now seemed to belong to someone else. She remembered his past, a tragedy Sarah had vaguely mentioned, a skilled mechanic who had lost everything. Could this unassuming man truly hold the key to saving her family's legacy? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. You have that in there, Marcus finally stammered, pointing a shaky finger at Arthur's notebook. He tried to regain control, but his voice betrayed him. A theory? A hypothesis? He desperately wanted to reduce Arthur's insight to mere conjecture. The loud hum of the service bay's ventilation system seemed to amplify his turmoil. Arthur nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. It is not a theory. It is documented behavior of this specific sensor model under certain vibrational loads, particularly in early production runs of this engine series. I have observed similar issues in other high-performance engines using comparable technology. He paused, then added, Page 72, second paragraph from the top. His calm delivery cut through Marcus's bluster. Eleanor watched Marcus crumble. The arrogant man now stood deflated, exposed. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the harsh lights. He looked from Arthur's calm, knowing face to the car, then to his team, who openly stared. The silence returned, more potent and awkward, broken only by distant traffic. Well, Eleanor finally said, her voice shaky but firm. She stepped between Arthur and Marcus, asserting her authority. Is what he says plausible, Marcus? Have you considered this point? Her unwavering gaze demanded an honest answer. She had never seen Marcus so visibly shaken, so utterly speechless. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He clenched and unclenched his fists. He wanted to argue, to deny, to protect his pride. But Arthur's detailed explanation left him no ground. The diagnostic logs, the intermittent problem, weeks of frustration, it all clicked into place. He saw the logic, even if it wounded his ego. It is unconventional, Marcus muttered, eyes cast downwards. He could not meet Eleanor's gaze. Highly specialized. We did not consider that specific interaction. Admitting defeat to the janitor before his team and boss was a bitter, career-defining humiliation. Deep shame burned in his gut. Eleanor felt vindication, but also renewed urgency. Time was running out. The investor meeting was hours away. "Then what are you waiting for, Marcus?" she asked, her voice sharper now, with a hint of steel. "If Arthur knows what he is talking about, let him show us. This dealership, my family's legacy, depends on it." Her eyes pleaded and commanded. Marcus hesitated, a battle raging. Letting the janitor touch the million-dollar car was an affront, an admission of his team's utter failure. But refusing, with Eleanor's desperate eyes on him, meant condemning the dealership and his job. His reputation was already in tatters. He looked at Arthur, who stood quiet, patient, holding his worn notebook, neither gloating nor pushing, just waiting. With a heavy sigh, almost a groan, Marcus finally relented. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "All right," he ground out, the word tasting like ash. He stepped back, reluctantly making way. Resentment laced his voice. "But if he breaks anything, if he makes it worse—" He left the threat hanging, his eyes narrowed. "You touch it, janitor, but under my supervision. And do not think for a second I believe a word of this. A theory does not make it true." His brittle words, a desperate attempt at dignity, rang hollow. "All right, janitor, impress us," Marcus Thorne's voice echoed in the vast, high-ceilinged service bay, heavy with sarcasm. "Don't touch anything you can't clean with a rag and some spray." His words were a dismissive wave, a loud declaration of his continued disbelief. But Arthur heard only a dull hum. The car spoke a different language, a silent chorus of intricate parts, and Arthur's attention was already tuned to its whisper. He moved with a quiet certainty, his gaze sweeping over the sleek carbon fiber and intricate lines of the hypercar. The air, thick with the lingering scent of oil, grease, and cleaning solvents, felt suddenly charged around him. His worn hands, usually gripping a mop or a broom, now moved with a dancer's precision, brushing lightly over panels, feeling for vibrations, inconsistencies. Every inch of the million-dollar machine was a puzzle, and Arthur was already calculating the next move. Eleanor Vance stood a few feet back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, the immense weight of the morning heavy on her shoulders. She watched Arthur, a man she had seen countless times through the years, yet never truly seen until this moment. Her mind wrestled with the absurdity of it all, the fate of her family's legacy, resting on the silent observation of her janitor. A dry, metallic taste coated her tongue, a bitter mix of anxiety and a fading, desperate hope. This was it, she thought, her internal voice a shaky whisper. The final desperate throw of the dice. A janitor. What was I thinking? Yet something in his quiet intensity, in the focused concentration etched on his gaunt face, held her captive. It was a presence utterly unlike Marcus's bluster. Sarah Jenkins stood silently beside Eleanor, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. She watched Eleanor's pale face, seeing the flicker of despair in her eyes. Then a slow, hesitant curiosity began to stir. Sarah had known Arthur longer than most, witnessing his quiet competence in 1,000 small ways. She felt a cautious optimism, a fragile seed struggling to sprout in the barren landscape of their predicament. Marcus continued his commentary, a low derisive murmur directed at his small team of baffled technicians. "He'll probably try to polish it back to life," he muttered, loud enough for Arthur to hear, then chuckled without humor. One of the younger technicians offered a weak, nervous laugh in response, his eyes darting between Marcus and the still, observant figure of Arthur. Arthur did not acknowledge the mockery. He did not reach for a diagnostic tablet, nor did he connect any of the sophisticated cables that lay coiled on the service bay floor. He simply looked, his eyes like high-powered scanners, tracing every hose, every wire, every minute connection. He crouched low, his knees popping softly in the quiet, then stood, then knelt again, his head cocked slightly, as if listening to an inaudible whisper from the engine's heart. His fingers tapped gently on various surfaces, feeling for subtle changes in resonance, checking for minute shifts in material or density. He breathed in deeply, the familiar scent of high-grade oil and precise metal filling his lungs, searching for any sour note, any discordant odor that would betray a hidden fault. He moved with the quiet grace of someone deeply familiar with the architecture of engines, each movement purposeful, economical. He then moved to the rear of the car, where the intricate engine was partially visible through a transparent panel. The hum of the garage's ventilation system was the only sound now, a steady background drone. No, not here, his mind articulated, dismissing the obvious. Too easily found. The experts checked this 10 times and they looked at the big, showy components. He knew the problem would be more subtle, more insidious. He spent a long moment studying a small, almost hidden auxiliary component, one that regulated a minor yet critical pressure valve within a complex hydraulic circuit. It was tucked away, easily missed, overshadowed by larger, flashier parts that drew the eye. The component itself was no bigger than his thumb, a small cylinder of brushed aluminum, crisscrossed with tiny hoses and wires. It was an unsung hero of the engine, performing a vital but often overlooked function. His eyes narrowed further. A tiny, almost hair-thin line appeared on the surface of the component, just above one of the miniature hose connections. It was a manufacturing imperfection, not a crack from stress or fatigue. So small, so subtle, it looked like a stray strand of carbon fiber that had somehow adhered to the metal, or a trick of the harsh fluorescent light playing upon the surface. He felt the cold metal of the car against his skin as he leaned in closer. Arthur gently touched it, his finger feeling the ever-so-slight, almost imperceptible ridge along the line. It was barely there, a flaw that would be dismissed as negligible by most. Yet Arthur's senses, honed by years of silent observation and an innate understanding of mechanical perfection, recognized it instantly. There his mind confirmed, a quiet triumph echoing in his thoughts. The ghost in the machine. So small, yet enough to throw the entire symphony off key. He straightened up, his movements fluid and unhurried. The air in the service bay seemed to tighten, holding its breath. "This," he said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen, finally quieting Marcus's ongoing mumbles. He pointed with a clean finger, not even a trace of grease marring its tip, directly at the tiny, almost invisible line. Eleanor strained to see what he indicated. Her eyes, used to scanning grand showrooms and elegant vehicles, had to adjust to the almost microscopic detail. She squinted, then took a hesitant step closer, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A tiny gasp escaped her lips as she finally made out the faint imperfection, a nearly invisible scar on the component. It was nothing, and yet, in the intensity of Arthur's gaze, it felt like everything. Marcus, annoyed at being interrupted, swaggered over, trying to regain control of the room. "What is it, janitor? A smudge? Did you find a dust bunny? Perhaps a loose thread from your uniform?" He peered over Arthur's shoulder, then scoffed loudly. "That's nothing, a superficial mark. We check for structural integrity, not cosmetic blemishes. This isn't a beauty pageant, it's a high-performance engine." His tone was laced with condescension, a desperate attempt to reassert his authority. Arthur met Marcus's gaze, his own eyes calm and unwavering. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just a quiet, profound certainty. "It is not cosmetic," he stated, his voice even and precise. "It affects the micro-calibration of the pressure regulator. A bypass, however slight, through that imperfection causes an intermittent, almost undetectable drop in internal pressure within the hydraulic system." Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. A pressure regulator. That's what the external experts dismissed as within tolerance in their reports. The pieces began to click into place. a terrifying, exhilarating realization blossoming in her mind. Hope, cold and fragile just moments before, began to warm within her, slowly thawing the ice around her heart. She could almost feel the tightness in her chest beginning to ease. Arthur continued, elaborating on the complex chain reaction. He explained how this minute deviation, this almost imperceptible flaw over time, would create a cascade of subtle errors throughout the engine's intricate systems. It would manifest as the intractable, maddeningly intermittent problem that the chief technician and his entire team had been chasing for weeks. It was a problem of precision, he stated, not of brokenness, a subtle miscalibration rather than a catastrophic failure. He made it sound so simple, so utterly logical. He then gestured toward his worn notebook, now open on a nearby workbench, its grease-stained cover a stark contrast to the gleaming car. His diagrams, filled with minute annotations and complex equations, were astonishingly intricate, yet perfectly clear in their detailed explanation. They were the work of a mind that saw beyond the surface into the very soul of the machinery. He had anticipated this. He had seen this problem before in his mind's eye, in the quiet solitude of his janitorial closet. Eleanor looked from the notebook with its undeniable proof to the car, then back to Arthur. He spoke with such quiet authority, such undeniable understanding, that her initial despair began to recede like a tide. It was replaced by a fierce, almost desperate new hope. Her heart, which had been a lead weight in her chest, began to flutter with a fragile, unfamiliar lightness. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in weeks. It was a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, salvation for Vance Luxury Motors was not entirely out of reach. The air still carried the metallic scent of tension. But now, a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness of possibility began to blend with it. Marcus still looked skeptical, a scowl deepening on his face, but his usual bluster had gone, replaced by a grudging silence. He shifted his weight, avoiding eye contact with Arthur, his pride visibly wounded. His technicians, however, edged closer, their faces etched with a mix of professional curiosity and a reluctant, dawning respect. They saw the diagrams, they heard the explanation, and they knew the complex problem Arthur was describing. They recognized the brilliance, however unwillingly. Arthur retrieved a small, specialized toolkit from his cleaning cart, not the standard issue garage tools. These were delicate instruments, some looking more like a surgeon's precision tools than a mechanic's. They were meticulously arranged, each in its felt-lined slot, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He selected a miniature screwdriver, its tip almost impossibly fine, designed for the most intricate of adjustments. He took a deep, steady breath, the air in the garage suddenly thick with anticipation. Every eye in the service bay was fixed on him, every breath held. Eleanor held hers too, her fingers clasped so tightly her knuckles were white against her pale skin. She could almost taste the metallic tang of fear and hope, now inextricably mixed, on her tongue. Her entire future, the legacy of her family, hung in this single, suspended moment. With steady, unhurried hands, Arthur began to meticulously disassemble the small, intricate part of the engine. The pressure regulator he had identified. Each turn of the miniature screw, each gentle pry of a delicate component, was deliberate, precise, a testament to his focused expertise. He was not just fixing a car, he was unveiling a truth, a hidden secret that had brought an empire to its knees. The true hidden problem, now on the verge of being fully exposed, was almost visible, waiting beneath his skilled fingers. The air in the service bay hung thick with unspoken questions in a strained silence as Arthur's careful hands moved with a quiet certainty. The faint metallic click of his specialized tools echoed in the vast space, each sound precise, deliberate. He had ignored the lingering stares, the murmurs of doubt, and Marcus's barely concealed hostility, focusing instead on the intricate heart of the hypercar, a machine that had brought an empire to its knees. His fingers, calloused from years of janitorial work, yet possessing the delicate touch of a master craftsman, navigated the complex wiring and microcomponents with an almost surgical grace. He found himself lost in the problem, the external world fading into a soft hum, his mind racing through countless schematics, past failures, in theoretical possibilities. He knew exactly what he searched for, a phantom flaw that had eluded every other pair of eyes. This was not about a loose wire or a failing sensor, the obvious culprits his predecessors had chased. This was far more insidious, a hidden malignancy deep within the system, a whisper of imperfection designed to go unnoticed by all but the most discerning gaze. He remembered similar cases from his past, instances where seemingly minor details had spiraled into devastating breakdowns, costing more than just money. Those memories, sharp and unforgiving, fueled his focus, sharpening his already keen senses to an almost painful degree. He felt the cool metal against his skin, detected the faint scent of ozone and lubricant, and heard the subtle creak of the car's suspension under his weight. Finally, with a gentle but firm twist, Arthur extracted a small, cylindrical component, no larger than his thumb. He held it up, catching the harsh fluorescent light, and turned it slowly for all to see. It looked utterly ordinary, a perfectly machined piece of metal and ceramic, pristine and harmless. Marcus, who had been hovering nearby, a sneer ready on his lips, saw nothing amiss. Eleanor, her breath caught in her throat, leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the tiny object, searching for the telltale sign of damage. The other technicians exchanged bewildered glances, their faces etched with confusion, their years of experience offering no immediate answer to this seemingly perfect part. This, Arthur stated, his voice quiet but resonating with absolute conviction, is the problem. He held it steady, his gaze unwavering as he addressed the assembly. It is not a system failure. There are no diagnostic codes for this, because the system itself believes it is functioning perfectly. He paused, allowing his words to sink in, the weight of their implications settling upon the shoulders of everyone present. Marcus's expression tightened, a flicker of apprehension replacing his earlier disdain. He wanted to interrupt, to demand an explanation, but found his voice trapped in his throat, a growing dread silencing his usual bluster. The material itself, Arthur continued, his eyes now sweeping over the part, pointing with a clean fingernail to an almost invisible point near its base, has a microscopic structural imperfection, a manufacturing defect. It is an air bubble trapped during the casting process, far too small to be seen with the naked eye, even under magnification during standard quality control checks. He explained how this tiny flaw created an infinitesimal, almost immeasurable resistance in the electrical current that passed through it. It was a detail so minute, so subtle, that no standard diagnostic equipment could ever detect it. He knew this from his own painful experiences. Over time, Arthur elaborated, his voice gaining a quiet intensity, that resistance generated an equally microscopic amount of heat, not enough to burn out, not enough to trip a sensor, but just enough to cause a molecular expansion and contraction cycle within the component. He painted a vivid picture of the relentless, almost imperceptible stress, a slow torture endured by the critical part. Eventually, this led to a minute, intermittent break in the circuit, a signal dropout that lasted only milliseconds. The car's complex computer system was receiving incomplete data, random blips of interruption, causing it to misfire, to seize, to behave erratically as if it had suffered a catastrophic cascade failure. He explained further, delving into the precise impact on the engine's timing and fuel injection, describing how the car's internal logic, designed to compensate for minor fluctuations, was overwhelmed by these random, untraceable glitches. The engine, rather than failing completely, was being driven insane by phantom data, struggling to operate on false instructions. Arthur's words, though technical, were delivered with such clarity and conviction that even those unfamiliar with automotive engineering could grasp the profound nature of the flaw. He wasn't just identifying a problem, he was exposing a ghost in the machine, a flaw of creation, not of wear or tear. Marcus's face, which had been contorted in a mixture of disbelief and growing anger, now crumpled. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pallid and exposed under the harsh lights. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a sickness rising from the pit of his stomach. A manufacturing defect, a microscopic air bubble. He had dismissed Arthur, laughed at the janitor, allowed his arrogance to blind him, and here stood the proof of his monumental oversight. His team had spent weeks tearing apart the engine, replacing costly parts, running endless diagnostics, all while this tiny hidden enemy mocked their every effort. The thought of his confident pronouncements, his dismissive words towards Eleanor, now replayed in his mind, searing him with shame. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white, wanting desperately to lash out, to deny, to argue, but the precise logic of Arthur's explanation, the sheer undeniable truth of it, silenced him completely. His team members who had idolized him now looked at Arthur with a mixture of awe and respect, a silent betrayal that cut Marcus deeper than any spoken word. He felt the ground beneath him crumble, his authority, his reputation, his very identity as the chief technician dissolving into dust. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on him, suffocating him with the weight of his own hubris. He could taste the bitter tang of defeat, a flavor he had never before truly known. Eleanor, on the other hand, felt a profound shift within her. The bone-deep despair that had settled in her chest for weeks began to recede, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief and a dawning, vibrant admiration. Her eyes, which had been clouded with worry, now sparkled with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She watched Arthur not as the unassuming janitor she had grown accustomed to seeing, but as a man of extraordinary intellect and precision. His quiet demeanor, which she had once interpreted as shyness or meekness, now seemed a testament to his deep, focused brilliance. She felt a surge of shame for ever doubting him, for allowing Marcus's arrogance to overshadow her own instincts. A warmth spread through her, chasing away the cold grip of anxiety. She took a small, involuntary step closer to Arthur, her gaze fixed on his hands, then on his face, which remained calm and unreadable. The weight of Vance Luxury Motors, the legacy of her family, the imminent threat of bankruptcy, all of it seemed to lift, if only for this moment. She saw the meticulous care with which Arthur handled the small, flawed component, the quiet confidence that radiated from him. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes. This man, the one everyone had dismissed, had saved her, saved everything. Sarah, standing quietly beside Eleanor, offered a small, knowing smile, a subtle nod of affirmation that Eleanor barely registered. Her focus was entirely on Arthur, her mind reeling with the implications of his discovery. This was not just a fix, it was a revelation. It proved that true genius often hid in plain sight, overlooked by those too consumed by their own preconceived notions. She wondered how many times Arthur had observed their struggles, how many times he had known the answer, yet remained silent, shrouded by his uniform and his past. A complex mix of emotions swirled within her. Gratitude, regret, and a burgeoning sense of hope that felt utterly alien after weeks of despair. Arthur finished his explanation, holding the small, flawed cylinder still. The silence that followed was different now, not the heavy, despairing quiet from before, but a charged, almost reverent hush. He did not boast, did not even offer a triumphant glance. His eyes, clear and steady, lifted from the tiny component. They met Eleanor's across the bay, a quiet understanding passing between them, a wordless acknowledgement of the battle fought and the truth revealed. Marcus, unable to endure the collective gaze, the profound shame and the utter defeat that now engulfed him, felt his entire body tremble. His rigid posture sagged. He turned slowly, his face a mask of bitter humiliation, and began to walk away, retreating from the harsh light of the revelation, disappearing into the darker, less illuminated corners of the service bay. Arthur's gaze lingered on the exposed engine, the faulty component a dark, silent accusation. He glanced at Eleanor, her face a mixture of awe and dawning hope, then turned away. He needed a moment, a deep breath, to quiet the tremors that still ran through his hands. The weight of all those watching, all those expectations, pressed down on him. Yet a quiet certainty also settled in his chest, a resolve he had not felt in years. He moved with a sudden, purposeful stride, not towards a toolbox, but towards the back corner of the service bay. There, nestled behind stacks of old tires and forgotten parts, sat his small metal janitorial cart. Beneath a grimy oil-stained tarp, he carefully uncovered a wooden box. The smell of metal filings and machine oil rose faintly as he opened it. Inside, nestled among other meticulously crafted pieces, lay a component identical to the one he had just removed from the hypercar. It was forged from a slightly different alloy, engineered with a microscopic tolerance that only a true master could achieve. He had spent countless hours in his small, cluttered nook, driven by an instinct he could not ignore, anticipating failures even in machines he only observed from a distance. Eleanor watched him, her eyes wide, tracking his every movement. She saw the care with which he selected the part, the way his fingers, usually stained with floor wax and cleaning solution, now handled the delicate mechanism with the precision of a surgeon. The harsh fluorescent lights of the service bay cast long shadows, making the scene feel stark, almost cinematic. A tremor ran through her, a mixture of fear that this newfound hope might yet be snatched away, and a burgeoning admiration for this quiet man. She could hear her own heartbeat, a frantic drum in her ears, louder than any sound in the vast, echoing garage. Arthur returned to the car, the replacement part held carefully in his palm. He did not speak. His focus was absolute, a silent intensity that seemed to draw all the ambient noise from the room. The other technicians, including Marcus, stood rooted to their spots, their initial skepticism giving way to a grudging, almost fearful curiosity. They watched his hands, swift and efficient, as he began the delicate process of installation. Each movement was deliberate, economical, born of a lifetime spent understanding the intricate dance of gears and circuits. He bypassed the standard diagnostic ports, his experienced fingers tracing the lines of the engine block, feeling for the subtle vibrations, the precise fit. He picked up a small, specialized torque wrench, its polished chrome gleaming under the lights. His grip was firm, his knuckles white, but his touch was feather-light. He tightened a series of bolts, each click a tiny affirmation of correct tension, a small victory in the silent battle against mechanical failure. Eleanor found herself leaning forward, her breath held captive in her lungs. She could almost taste the metallic tang of anxiety on her tongue. The scent of oil and gasoline, usually a familiar background note in the garage, now seemed sharp, almost acrid. She saw the glint of sweat on Arthur's brow, the single-minded devotion in his eyes, and something shifted within her. This was not merely a janitor. This was an artist at work, his canvas a million-dollar machine. The reassembly continued, a meticulous ballet of hands and tools. Arthur replaced a small sensor, then reconnected a cluster of wires, each connection tested with a gentle tug. He worked with an innate rhythm, a quiet confidence that transcended the simple act of repair. He knew this engine, not just from diagrams, but from an intuitive understanding of its every component, its every potential weakness. He remembered countless nights in his small nook, poring over schematics, imagining these very parts, how they would fail, how they could be made better. This was not just a hymn, it was his calling, a deep, silent language he spoke fluently. A faint clink of metal against metal, a soft hiss as a hose was reattached. Each sound punctuated the heavy silence in the service bay. Eleanor's gaze never left Arthur. She saw the fine lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands from exertion, but also the unwavering certainty in his movements. The weight of her family's legacy, the imminent collapse of everything her father had built, seemed to lift ever so slightly with each precise action Arthur took. A fragile tendril of hope, something she had thought long dead, began to unfurl in her chest. She remembered her father's hands, strong and capable, always covered in grease, and she saw a similar dedication in Arthur's. He stepped back for a moment, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He surveyed his work, a critical eye scanning every connection, every reinstated panel. He ran his hand lightly over the cool carbon fiber body of the car, a gesture of almost paternal affection. The air thickened with anticipation. Eleanor felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. Sarah, standing a few feet behind Eleanor, placed a reassuring hand on her boss's shoulder. Sarah's own face was etched with a mixture of disbelief and a growing sense of wonder. Arthur reached into the car's interior, pulling out the sleek, heavy key fob. He slid into the driver's seat with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. The leather creaked softly under his weight. He inserted the key into the ignition, and the dashboard lights flared to life, a silent symphony of greens and blues. A collective intake of breath swept through the small crowd gathered around the hypercar. Marcus shifted his weight, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Lingering resentment, but also a dawning realization of his own profound mistake. Arthur's eyes, usually so guarded, held a focused intensity. He took another deep breath, a final, almost reverent pause. Then he turned the key. The sound that followed was not the stuttering cough of a dying engine, nor the deafening silence of complete failure. Instead, a deep, guttural growl rippled through the service bay, then smoothed into a powerful rhythmic purr. The million-dollar car, dormant for weeks, roared to life. The engine settled into a perfectly balanced hum, a sound of raw power and exquisite engineering, now singing its intended song. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over Eleanor. Her knees felt weak, and she had to grip Sarah's arm to steady herself. The sound was like music, a symphony of salvation. Her eyes welled with tears, tears of gratitude, tears of exhaustion, tears for the burden that had just been lifted. The air in the service bay vibrated with the engine's power, a tangible presence that filled every corner of the room. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Arthur's lips as he listened, confirming the perfection of his repair. At that exact moment, a tall, distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped silently into the service bay from a side entrance. He had arrived earlier than expected, wanting to observe the situation firsthand, hoping to catch a glimpse of the chaos he had anticipated. His name was Mr. Harrison, the investor whose decision would seal the fate of Vance Luxury Motors. He moved with quiet authority, his presence usually commanding immediate attention. But now every eye, every mind, was fixed on the hypercar and its newly resurrected engine. He stopped just inside the entrance, unnoticed by the others, his keen eyes sweeping across the scene. He saw Eleanor, her face streaked with tears of joy, her body trembling with overwhelming relief. He saw the technicians, their faces etched with stunned amazement. And he saw Arthur, still in the driver's seat, a quiet master surveying his triumph. Mr. Harrison watched as Arthur switched off the engine, then started it again, just to confirm the flawless performance. The powerful roar filled the space once more, a testament to true mechanical artistry. Mr. Harrison's expression, usually one of calm, detached calculation, softened into something else entirely. A look of genuine, impressed surprise spread across his features. This was not the scene of despair and failure he had expected. This was a spectacle of quiet genius, a dramatic turning point. Eleanor, looking up, finally saw him standing there, a figure of immense power, now observing the very miracle that had saved her business. A wide, relieved smile bloomed on her face, a radiant beam of gratitude that included Arthur, the silent savior whose hands had just spun gold from dust. The service bay was silent, except for the lingering hum of the hypercar. Eleanor, wet-eyed with relief, saw Arthur across the floor, his janitor's uniform hiding a quiet brilliance. Mr. Davies, the investor, approached Eleanor. His skepticism had vanished, replaced by deep satisfaction. He spoke of renewed confidence, his gaze acknowledging Arthur, the man who saved everything. Eleanor's knees trembled with gratitude. She excused herself from Mr. Davies, walking purposefully towards Arthur. He stood by the purring hypercar, grease-stained hands on its fender, a rare, faint smile on his lips. The bay's hum felt like success. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft but firm. She touched his arm. "You saved us. You saved everything." Arthur met her eyes, seeing genuine gratitude, a faint tear track on her cheek. A warmth spread through him, a feeling absent for years, a sense of real difference made. "It was a manufacturing defect," he explained, his voice measured with a hint of pride. "A microscopic tolerance error in the fuel injector's pressure sensor housing. Barely visible, but enough to starve the engine at high RPMs. Eleanor listened, understanding his knowledge. "Arthur, I was so blind," she admitted, her voice thick with regret. "We all were. You saw what no one else could. My family's legacy was hours from collapse. You pulled it back." She led him to a quieter corner. I want to offer you a position, Arthur, she said unwavering. Not as a janitor, our chief technician, or head of a new research and development division. This team needs your mind, your insight. Arthur looked at his hands, then Eleanor. The offer held possibility, but also unsettling responsibility. His past trauma, the catastrophic failure, had kept him hidden. Stepping into the light felt dangerous. He saw the faces of those he lost, their memory a painful whisper. Could he embrace this without repeating the past? Eleanor, he whispered, I appreciate the offer. My way of working is different. I need quiet. I need freedom to follow the problem, wherever it leads. I cannot be confined by schedules or constant supervision. He spoke his truth. His genius thrived in solitude, in the meticulous pursuit of perfection. Eleanor listened, understanding dawning. She recognized his passion, his need for a specific environment. You need your own space, she surmised, a small smile forming. A sanctuary for your work, a place to tinker, design, explore without interruption. Arthur nodded. Yes, I want to focus on preventing failures, on understanding hidden flaws. Not just fixing what's broken, but ensuring it never breaks again. He thought of his notebook, a lifetime of observations. This was his calling, born from a painful past. The familiar ache in his chest was now tempered by purpose. Eleanor's smile widened. Then that is what you shall have, Arthur. Your own dedicated workshop, fully equipped, separate from the main bay. Complete autonomy over your research projects. You will set your own hours, define your own goals. She extended her hand, her gaze firm. Will you help us build the future of Vance Luxury Motors? He looked at her hand, then her eyes. He saw a woman who faced ruin with courage, offering him redemption. The decision felt heavy, yet right. His past burden would not vanish, but it could be channeled. He reached out, his calloused hand meeting hers. I accept, he said, quiet resolve in his voice. Months passed, then a full year. Vance Luxury Motors, once near bankruptcy, saw a remarkable resurgence. News of the million-dollar car and its hidden savior spread. High-profile clients, drawn by the dealership's reputation for solving the impossible, flocked to the showroom. The halls, once hushed, now buzzed with chatter and clinking champagne glasses. Eleanor, no longer burdened by despair, walked with renewed confidence. She had transformed the dealership's spirit. Sarah Jenkins, the office manager, beamed at soaring sales figures, delighted by the thriving business. The showroom air, once anxious, now smelled of new leather, polished chrome, and success. Arthur had established his own domain. Tucked at the service bay's far end, behind frosted glass, lay his new workshop. It was a haven of precision, filled with bespoke tools, diagnostic equipment, and the scent of oil and metal. Here he dissected components, sketched diagrams, and prototyped solutions. He was no longer the invisible janitor, but the revered head of advanced diagnostics. He was not entirely alone. Under his watchful eye, 2 young apprentices rotated through his workshop, soaking up his unparalleled knowledge. He taught them to see beyond the obvious, to listen to an engine's subtle whispers, to trust instincts as much as instruments. They looked at him with awe and respect, learning from a true master. One afternoon, Arthur stood at the showroom's edge, coffee in hand. He wore a clean, tailored dark blue uniform, a contrast to his old gray. His slight limp remained, an echo of his past, but it no longer felt like a mark of brokenness. It was simply part of him. He watched Eleanor, radiant, shake hands with a client beside a sleek hypercar. A genuine smile lit her face, far from her old, strained expression. He felt quiet pride, deep satisfaction. The crushing weight of guilt and sorrow that defined his life began to lift, replaced by purpose. He was home. He was seen. He was useful. He sipped his coffee, a contented smile on his lips, at peace with his past and embracing his future.